Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Coffee with the Mayor. It is our September meeting, and I appreciate your time this morning, and I'm going to respect your time. My guest this morning is St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell, and I have also with us today the Chairman Pro Tem Sidney Clark. For the sake of the interviews here and this coffee, I'm comfortable taking off my mask. I think we have enough distance between us, so I'm going to take my mask off so that my facial expressions and all of that can be heard more clearly by all of you. So if you are all comfortable with that, we can do that. So again, welcome. I want to thank you for attending with us this morning. I really appreciate the time that you've taken out to be with all of us. And I'm going to be respectful of your time because I know you're a busy person and I don't want to take too much of your time. We tend to like our conversation here. We're a community of people who like to talk, and that's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing at all. And it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation from yourself as well as the Mayor Pro Tem. You're doing a lot of good things here in Olivet. A lot of things to be proud of. And so
thank you very much.
For that.
Thank you.
So some of you have already sent questions in, and we're going to take your questions as we move along. But I thought we'd start out with something very simple so that we all have a real understanding of what the role of the county prosecutor is. So a 101, what is the job of the county prosecutor?
You know, and it's interesting you asked that. As I was campaigning for this job a couple of years ago, as I'm talking to residents and knocking on doors, it did occur to me that a lot of people don't know the role of the county prosecutor. Many people thought it was an appointed position, or they didn't know exactly what we did. And so essentially what we do is we process and prosecute all misdemeanors and felonies in St. Louis County. Now, if it's an ordinance violation or traffic ticket, as you all know, then that will come to an individual municipality. But any misdemeanors or felonies in St. Louis County would be handled by our office. So we work with law enforcement with respect to the investigatory side of it. And so once they complete their investigation, they bring that case to us, and then we would make a charging decision and move forward from that. And so that's ours. And there's some other things that we'll talk about that we've expanded our role at, and I think in some very positive ways that I think are good for residents of St. Louis County.
Okay, that's great. So do you view the position differently now that you're actually in the role of prosecutor versus before you took the job?
You know, so I'm a big believer in preparation and making sure that I know what I'm walking into before I do. And so, you know, one thing that we did was we set up a transition team to help us transition and be able to hit the ground running, which was chaired by former Missouri Supreme Court Justice Mike Wolf, which many in the area know, as well as so many others, Dr. Kendra Holmes, the COO and now Vice President of Affinia, and former prosecutors, judges, even a few defense attorneys on there. We wanted to make sure that we were that we had a full grasp of what we were walking into, and that we were prepared. And so yes, it's hard to fully be able to digest the job until you're in it, but we were ready with our policies, with the rollout of those policies, I should say. And so, yes, to a certain degree, yeah, we were ready to go. And then a certain degree, not at all, you know, because again, until you get in the job, and I'm sure as you all know, until you get in the job, there's just things that you just cannot predict.
Right, I would agree with that. I think for us, the time commitment, I've not met a council member yet who has ever said, wow, this was less time commitment than I thought it would be. It is far more time commitment. And in many ways, it is a 24/7 job. And I'm sure it is for you even more so, because crime doesn't happen on a 9-to-5 schedule. It happens around the clock.
Indeed.
And your mind is always thinking about what what it is that you're doing.
And, you know, I'll even say last night as an example, there's one game I've been looking forward to. Kansas City Chiefs versus Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Holmes. In the middle of that game, we got a call about a homicide. So we had to head out there, and that's part of the job. And,
Right.
and I've served on the council as well, so I know the time commitments that you all face as well. Constituents, when they have situations, they don't care if it's after work. This is your job, and this is what you're supposed to do. That's what they expect. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I commend all of you all that are willing to do these jobs,
Well,
and
thank you.
often thankless jobs.
It can be very tough at times, but it is equally as rewarding. And so,
Indeed.
So what are some of the main differences you've experienced as the prosecuting attorney versus when you served as a public defender? And do you feel that your previous role as public defender has prepared you for this? And what have you brought into it?
There's a big difference. And I can tell you, I was one of those people in law school that I was going to be a public defender. I wasn't interested in any other jobs. I interviewed for a few just for the experience, but I wanted to represent individuals who had been charged with crimes. And you know, coming from, you know, I grew up in the unincorporated Spanish Lake kind of Florissant area. And so, you know, I knew a lot of people who had been on the wrong side of the law, and I wanted to make certain that they received fair representation. I was kind of a child of the O.J. Simpson trial, and what that showed me is that oftentimes in our justice system, unfortunately, that those with means receive a different type of justice, and I wanted to make certain that at least my clients received fair representation. And at the time, I was under the belief that everyone was innocent. And after doing the job for a few years, I started to realize that that's not quite the case. And so instead of being able to help one individual one at a time, which I still think is a very important job for those who do it, but being able to help one individual at a time is a stark contrast to being able to help so many people in this role. When you're a defense attorney, oftentimes you are kind of limited by the prosecutor that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a reasonable prosecutor, then there'll probably be a reasonable resolution. But if you're not, then it can go in a lot of different ways. And one thing that we wanted to focus on with our administration was fairness, equity. We didn't want crimes in West County to be treated differently than crimes in North and Central County. We wanted to treat everyone. We wanted to make certain that justice was being treated fairly, because the families in those less affluent areas care about their safety and their family safety and their schools just as much as those in West County. And we want to make certain that everyone enjoys that. And so as in this role, we get an opportunity to do that. And I think it's important, as well as some of the things that we've done proactively, expanding diversion programs, which we'll talk about. I'm assuming we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, it is different, but very rewarding at the same time.
That's great. Your dad was a police officer. Where was he?
Atlanta Metro in Atlanta, Georgia. So that was kind of my second home. I spent most of my summers growing up in Atlanta. He moved there when I was just a kid, very young. So that's always been my second home.
Okay. So as a young Black man growing up in North County, did your dad have the talk with you? Did he tell you how to interact with police officers? What was your experience as a young Black man growing up here in St. Louis County?
The implication being that I'm not young anymore, Mayor. I think that's what you're saying, but that's okay. And it's true. I can't deny. But yeah, I actually, my father and I did have that conversation. My mother and I had that conversation. I had several uncles who had that conversation. And it is an unfortunate fact in Black and brown communities by and large that we do have to have that conversation. And you know, we did actually talk about how to encounter a police officer in a traffic stop and things of that nature. And, you know, and so he always told me, make sure when the first time I drove a car, even before that, when he was teaching me, you have your insurance, you have your registration right there where exactly where you know where it is. So you're not fumbling for it.
Right.
And because that can raise suspicions, fairly or unfairly, it's the truth. And so, and when you roll that window down, when that officer, before that officer comes, you have those things ready for him. And that's what he always taught me. My, you know, again, my mother and uncles, and again, I'm not saying that it's fair, because I also was the young black person who had been pulled over numerous times and set on the curb, car searched, and I wasn't into anything. I was a kid playing sports and going to school, and I've even told the story before. I was pulled over at least enough to where I thought it was normal, and I didn't realize that it wasn't until I went to law school and I took my crim law class, and I was like, hold up, that wasn't right. So it is something that young African American kids and kids from less affluent communities too, you see more often. I'm gonna tell one quick anecdote. As a public defender at that time, I worked with this what was called the Special Public Defender's Office. So we handled conflict cases throughout the region. And so that would send me out to places like St. John sometime. And, you know, I'm a kid from North County. And so when I got there, as a stark contrast from St. Louis courts, where you see so many young black males in courts, but you go out to St. John, it's the complete opposite. You see young white males. And so I'm interviewing my client, as we do with the public defender's office. And first thing out of his mouth is, I'm tired of the police harassing me. And I'm thinking to myself, hold up, you're not black? What are you talking about? but what I realize is that this is an issue that we see in poor communities. Now, African American and brown communities disproportionately are poor, so disproportionately have these experiences, but we also see those in poor white communities as well.
I had the same conversation with my mother, and my brothers had the same conversation. I grew up right here in Olivet, and the issues of racial profiling, it wasn't as prevalent here. It still happened from time to time, but I'm only speaking for me and my brothers. But when we would go through Ladue, we went to Ladue High School, and often going through Ladue, we would get pulled over. And the first question was, what are you doing here? Yeah. You have no right to be here. We went to school there, but we were asked that. Recently, you know, me and my wife were driving through Ladue, and a police officer followed us right from the Ladue Schnooks all the way back down Dillman until we got in Olivet, and he turned around. That was recent, within 2 or 3 years ago. My father always taught me that in the eyes of the law, for black men, you are guilty until you are proven innocent. And unfortunately, that is prevalent throughout this entire country, not just St. Louis. But at the same time, he said, just be prepared. Like you said, your parents taught you, be prepared. Do as you're asked to do and go on about your way. Until that changes, that's the best thing that you can do until it changes. And
again, it's not fair, but we live in this world and we have to make a way in this world. And fair or unfair, we have to deal with it. And I have a similar story. I don't know if you all know where Berkeley South High School is. It's right on New Florissant Road in Ferguson. It used to be a convent, and the nuns there would let us play basketball in their gym on Thursday nights. One of our big things with teenagers. And so at that time, I lived near 367 in Parker Road. So the way for me to get there, which was closer to, which was on New Florissant, close to the 70, but the easiest way is 270 and just shoot across New Florissant. Problem is, we all knew, our friends, my African-American friends, we knew going down New Florissant and Ferguson at that time, you were going to get pulled over. So we would go all the way around 270, 170, 70 to Florissant Road so that we could be on Florissant Road for a shorter period of time because we were going to get pulled over, similar like Jennings Station Road back in the day.
Yeah. St. John is the same way. St. John was the same way.
There were a lot of places that we knew at nighttime, like you could tell me there was money on the street. I wasn't going to get it because,
Right.
you know, I was afraid of being pulled over. And that is a unfortunate fact in many places, not just the St. Louis region, but across the country.
It's hurtful too.
It
It
really
really
is.
is hurtful because you would think that here we are in 2020 that
Right.
we would be seen as equal. And what irks me so is when you hear white people say, well, stop complaining. You're always complaining about something.
Mhm.
You know,
I think these are very valid complaints, and I think that it saddens me that that would be the reason people would be pulled over, is the color of their skin. And the reality is that until you've done something wrong, you're innocent.
you would think.
You would think.
You would think. But
All right, well, we're going to try to move this to a little lighter note. Let's talk about your successes. What are you proud of since you've taken office? What have you done that you wanted to do and you did?
And I want to, and there are several things, and I'm going to pick a few of them, so I won't take too much of
Oh,
your time.
no. This is all about you. Go
we're
right
happy
ahead.
to have you here.
Right.
Speak,
I'm
speak,
happy to be
please.
here, and hopefully this isn't the last time.
Nope.
Yes, will not be.
And so I want to make sure that I recognize and acknowledge not only our transition team, but our leadership team, because they had a big hand in many stakeholders around this community who've had a hand in it. And so it starts with our diversion program. One thing that we know is that those who tend to commit violent crimes, because again, once you cross that threshold of violent and serious crimes, you're going to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But what we know is that that violent serious offender doesn't start there. They generally start at the low level, nonviolent, serious, nonviolent felonies or misdemeanors or what have you, and they progress up. After that cycle of incarceration starts. And what happens, in research is clear, is that those individuals overwhelmingly are suffering with substance use disorder, mental health, in need of mental health care, and then a range of other things, and sometimes several at the same time. And what we also know is that if you put that individual in jail, that's not going to help the problem.
No.
A 3-day stay in jail increases the likelihood by 40% that individual will be back on another offense. 5 days, 50%. Wow. And so we're talking about low-level, nonviolent individuals who just need help. They need treatment. And of the 70 to 80% in our jails who are suffering with those issues, only about 17% are receiving treatment. So these individuals are coming back in the community. They're not serving life sentences by and large. And so once they come out, that problem is still there. And we're not the most forgiving society of formerly incarcerated individuals. Right. Hard to get a job. They go from the streets where they can make thousands of dollars in a week to getting a job now where they can maybe make a few $100 in fast food or something like that. And then we scratch our heads when they reoffend. So one of the things that we did the first day after the election, as a matter of fact, we got right to work, no vacations. We started meeting with stakeholders in our community. Dr. Kendra Holmes is one of the first individuals that we worked with. And what we did was we understood this need and that it was comprehensive. And so in addition to working with organizations like Affinia Healthcare to provide substance use disorder treatment, places for people to provide mental health care, and other organizations to help with those things, we also realized that it takes a comprehensive approach. Because if you give an individual drug treatment, but they don't have a job, they are more likely to relapse. They're significantly likely to relapse. They don't have housing. So we reached out to organizations that we brought to the table. We created a diversion advisory committee. And so we have all these organizations that can help connect people with housing, help connect people with jobs, job training, because a lot of people, they get jobs, but they don't have the soft skills. So the Urban League and other organizations have been great to work with. And so now we've expanded to about 40 stakeholder organizations This does not cost any money to taxpayers. These are all organizations that are there on their own accord on a voluntary basis. But what we realized is that they are trying to reach the same group of people that now we have. So, unfortunately, drug users and people who actually have a problem, they're not usually raising their hand saying, help me.
Right.
That's
Right.
the
Right.
essence of the drug problem, unfortunately. When we have them, that means they've been charged with a crime. So we have a captive audience because it's a carrot and a stick. We can say, participate in this treatment. Participate in the treatment, we won't prosecute you. And so now we get an opportunity to bring these individuals to the experts that they need to be in front of, because as a lawyer, they didn't teach me how to administer drug treatment or mental health care. That's not my area of expertise. We wanted to get those experts at the table. And so we've greatly expanded that program. And so prior to our administration, now keep in mind, this is St. Louis County with 1 million people. And so we were treating somewhere around 200 people a year in treatment courts in St. Louis County. Now let's compare that to Kansas City, which has about 600,000, a little over half our population. They were treating about 80% more people than we were, somewhere in the 600 range. The Boot Hill, with 60,000 people, had more people in their drug treatment program than we had in St. Louis County. And that's because there just wasn't a commitment. And so we have completely reversed that. We have gone from the lowest functioning diversion program to, if the past numbers hold, we'll be the highest functioning.
Wow.
And so we have greatly expanded those who can get into our mental health programs, those who can get in our substance use disorder treatment programs. And thus far, and again, we know this won't hold, but thus far, of the people who have been entered into our pretrial diversion, only one has not completed successfully so far.
That's pretty good.
Now, we know that number won't hold, but when you think about recidivism rates across Missouri at 60%, recidivism rates across the country at 80%, we're
pretty
heading in the
phenomenal.
right direction.
Right.
And again, this isn't something we invented. We know you can look at the federal court district where they have much more resources than we do. And as a result, they have much lower recidivism rates in the single digits. And so when you give people the tools they need, they're more likely to succeed. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think that's a good thing.
Fabulous.
You spoke on a lot of things that I do at my job, my full-time job. I'm a career transition specialist at Job Corps.
Okay. So
And
you
so
get it.
I get
You
it.
absolutely
Because
get it.
if they don't have access to the education that's going to help them to find gainful employment, they're going to get frustrated. They'll go back to the streets to find money by any means possible. And what we try to do is match a student to some sort of skill where they can actually use it and apply it to real world situations. We've got students that were literally homeless that we came in, showed them some place, gave them a place to live, gave them food, and trained them on a job that can help them to make money. They don't have to rely on government assistance, and they can raise a family and take care of themselves. But I think overall with young people, especially young African-American men, is they have to believe and have a dream that they can do something beyond what they see. And if you can just get them to have some sort of hope, just an ounce of hope, and think that, yeah, I can get here. I can go there. I can have this. Surely they can move forward.
Absolutely. And I think that what coupled with that is exposure, being exposed to these different types of opportunities and things that they would have never known. And I taught at the community college. And so I had kids who were ready to go to Harvard, and I had kids who were not ready for college.
Right.
And everybody in between.
Yeah.
And one thing that I realized early on was that when they see these different types of jobs, some jobs they never even heard of, that you give them that hope. And I think we got to tie this back into something that I want to make sure that I mention is what goes to the heart of what not only our policies are, but what we're trying to do as the prosecutor's office and law enforcement is this keeps people safer.
Yes.
That when we address these root causes of crimes and get individuals, those low-level offenders, before they become violent offenders, to those types of opportunities,
Right.
they are less likely to offend, and we are less likely to be victims.
Right.
And so
Yes.
this
Right.
keeps us safer, and it saves us taxpayer dollars. It costs about $30,000 a year to incarcerate an individual.
Right.
Yes.
Treatment, on the other hand, we save anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 per individual, or less, or more, I should say, depending on the service that they receive. So again, not only does this help people, not only does it save us taxpayer dollars, but it keeps us safer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we're building a better society. That's the bottom line. We're building a better society, and that's really what it's really should be all about, is to build a better society, so that people are proud of who they are, proud of what they do. You know, I don't think there's anything better than being able to be proud of yourself.
Yes.
And if you don't give people that hope and that direction and that ability and that skill set to be able to have that, you're right. It becomes a very vicious cycle.
It
And
really does.
I wholeheartedly agree. If you can truncate the crime, or the victim, you know, the crime that these individuals are doing when they are nonviolent crimes, if you can truncate that and cut that right off and show them a better life and make them go in a totally different direction, that is that's a grand slam.
And I'd like to add a point too. So one thing that we do is, and Captain Farmer, who's our head of community engagement, is here. People can't see him, he's off camera. But one thing that we do is we make a point to meet with every family who has lost a loved one to a serious crime, or suffered with a serious crime, if they want to meet with us. Some families, you know, they're dealing with the trauma and they just want to get past it, but many do. And one thing that would come up in every single meeting with one of the families, or the victims for that matter, was who's the prosecutor and what's the experience that they have who's working our case. And so one of the things that we did, to your previous question, is we created an individualized unit, our homicides and major crimes unit. Prior to us coming in, we have what's called a homicide phone. Whoever has duty that week, they have to respond. Now I actually respond myself to most of them, but we also have another attorney who's assigned to that. And the policy prior to us was whoever responded handled the homicide. Problem with that is we had we had several attorneys in our office who just had not had that experience of handling a homicide trial. And that was one of the things that families were concerned with. And so we took our most experienced attorneys. We created that homicide unit to where the overwhelming majority of our homicides are with either those individuals or team leaders who also have a lot of experience. And we did the same thing with our sex teams and domestic violence units. Those are now specialized units because we want to build expertise in those very sensitive areas. So in addition to recognizing the need to address low-level and nonviolent offenders to get them off that track and get them the help they need, we also recognize that there are serious and violent offenders who need to be held accountable, and we want to make sure that our most experienced attorneys are available to do that.
And I think that is, I didn't realize that, and I think that's a huge comfort to the families who
Absolutely.
have been the victims of this crime, of this sort of violent crime, and that they know that they're getting the best.
Right.
That they're not just having anybody
Absolutely.
represent them and their loved one who has been victimized, and that, you know, they can put their faith in the fact that somebody's going to work really hard for them, and that's a great thing.
And I'll even add, and as you all know, just like your constituents, even if it's if they're having a problem that really has not much to do with you all,
Yes.
they still want to sit with you. They still want to talk to you
Yes.
and know that you care about
Yes.
that your city, and you know, but obviously the mayor and the mayor pro tem taking interest in an issue will help get it resolved.
Yep.
And so we have that same perspective at our office, is that I want those prosecutors to know, even if I'm not working on that particular case, because we have 120 employees, 65 attorneys. We process close to 8,000 to 9,000 cases a year. I couldn't handle them all if I wanted to.
No.
But at the same time, I want them to know that I'm here, that if they have questions, they can come to me. If one of my prosecutors isn't doing the job adequately, I'll get on them and make certain that happens. And I think that that's important, to be visible, be accountable. And that's one of the things that we take into the community as well. We want to show up and be available.
Right.
as you
It
are.
makes people feel good too, to know that you have taken a personal interest in their situation, that they're not just a number. You know, to actually have someone that you, as my father would say, press the flesh, someone who will shake your hand and say, hey, I understand what you're going through, rather than just saying, I'm just going to throw you into the pile.
Exactly.
It's important.
I agree.
I have one last question for you, and then I'm going to open it up to our audience. You campaigned on the promise that if you were elected, that you would reopen Michael Brown grand jury investigation.
Now, I got to stop you there. I did not campaign on that.
Okay. Okay.
As a matter of
My
fact,
bad.
our entire, and no, it's a common misconception because that
I'm
was
writing
a big issue.
Wikipedia and when I get home and go, misinformation.
Yeah, but that was a common misconception because that's such a scar on our region. And you know, a young man being killed, 18 years old, same age as my son. That is just a tough situation to deal with. But you know, I made a point out of respect for the family that I wasn't going to campaign on it. I didn't address it, and you can check our social media. We didn't run commercials. We were on social media, so you can see everything that we did. And so publicly, I did not address that subject because I didn't want to use it for political purposes. Now, privately, I did meet with the family, and what I promised them that I would do was, I promised them I wasn't going to promise them that I could prosecute, but I promised them that I would look into it, that we would take an independent prosecutor, a special prosecutor, I should say, and that we would give it a fair and thorough look.
Okay,
And-
so that
and that's
dovetails
what we
into my
did.
question
Exactly.
is, so, and thank you for explaining that.
Oh, no, I appreciate
I'm
the
writing
question.
Wikipedia when I go home. So when you did reopen the investigation to take a second look at it, did you have any expectations of how it might turn out this time? And obviously we all know how it did turn out. And what was your reaction to the second findings? And my last question is, how did you manage to keep the second investigation so quiet in a town where everyone knows everything about everybody?
Yeah. And first, I got to say, I want to make sure to acknowledge the family. I know that they weren't happy with the ultimate decision. I mean, again, as a prosecutor, you deal with the families. We've lost loved ones. I wasn't happy with it. You know, you make those
As a
connections.
parent,
As a parent,
you can understand.
you know, one thing that I'll say is, and this is a quick anecdote, is that when people ask me, well, how do I like the job? And my best analogy is to say, when I meet with families and I'm able to give them the justice that they want, it's the best job in the world. And when I can, it's the worst. And so that was one of the worst moments because of that. But as far as expectations, you know, I had already read the Department of Justice report, so I knew that was going to be a heavy lift. But I still wanted to keep my promise, and I'm big on that. I don't overpromise, and I try to keep the ones that I make. And so when we created our conviction incident review unit, that's a unit that looks at not only past wrongful convictions, because if we're going to put people in jail, we need safeguards to make sure we're getting it right. And so, but also that's a walled off unit that does not deal with law enforcement the way the rest of our office does. And that's why when we worked with stakeholders and even activists to determine how we should go about police investigations, we all came to the consensus that this would be the unit to do it. And so we I actually recruited someone, I actually interviewed her. I went to DC and interviewed her. She's a former federal prosecutor, She has extensive experience in investigating these kind of cases. And so when I interviewed her, as a matter of fact, I told her, this is a case that we have to deal with, and we have to keep that promise to the family, not publicly, because I wasn't talking about it publicly.
Right.
And we're going to keep that promise, and we've got to look at it and thoroughly, and then we're going to sit down with the family, and we're going to answer every single question that they have. And so what we did was we made a point not to talk about it, not only in the community, but in our office. One is that we didn't want the political influences. We didn't want people to start pushing and trying to influence the investigation. And so, yeah, there were two people that knew about it. Her, Dana Mulhauser, who's the head of that unit, and then eventually her investigator, who, because we're building that unit out, and myself. And one way that it was that helped us keep it quiet was COVID. Obviously, unfortunately, it's a pandemic, but she got an opportunity to really just sit down and focus on that case. And then don't get me wrong, there are other cases coming in that we still have to deal with, but that was one of her priorities. And once she finished her investigation, then her and I sat down and went through it. And I was, looking like, hey, what about this? What about, we did that process. And then once that decision was made, then we finally ran it by our chief trial attorney, who also was not in the office at the time in 2014. So we made a point that of the 2 to 3 to 4 people who ended up knowing about it and that at least had some input, not one of them was involved in that case at the time. No police officers, no prosecutors, no one involved with that case, because we wanted it to be a truly independent and special prosecutor, but independent prosecution. And so, the fact of the matter is, the Department of Justice under President Obama and Eric Holder sent a team of prosecutors and investigators, and we don't have nearly the resources that they have. And anyone who reads the Department of Justice report, you'll understand why we can't prosecute this case. And some people look at it and say, well, some things just don't seem right. Why is it not right? I get that. It is. It should always feel that way when an unarmed person is killed. The problem is, when I was on the defense side, if there was something didn't seem right, that I can make a case off of that. Right. But on this side, on the prosecution side, I have to prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And unfortunately, particularly with the physical evidence, and this case is about the physical evidence, it's just, we just don't, we can't meet that threshold to be able to prosecute a case. And so I wasn't going to hide or mislead this family. And again, I know they're not as happy with me, but I have a hell of a lot of respect for them, and I owe them and the community transparency. And I'll say this, when that case was closed by my predecessor, it was not closed with that family, and it was not closed in the minds of a lot of people in this community. And I felt that I owed, and it's not only that I owe the family, but at the end of the day, I think I owed the community honesty and nothing less.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy that you did that. I think it gave it a second look. And I think you're right. You had fresh eyes, and you brought in fresh eyes to see it in a totally clear way, without the political pressure, without the news knowing about it, without anybody knowing about it. And I think that was fair, and I think it was the right thing to do. And I understand why the family would have still been upset by that. I can't even imagine.
And
I can't even imagine. As a parent, I can't even imagine.
And I'll say this, I've met with, I don't even know the number of families that I've met with. And when it's a family that we don't have the evidence, or sometimes they think they know who did it, but we can't prove it, I don't care what the circumstances is. If you're not prosecuting, that family's not going to be happy.
Right.
And think about it.
Right.
If it was your family member, you wouldn't be either.
Absolutely.
So I never
Skin.
blame a family
Yes.
Right.
when they're, I don't care if we have video showing that the individual they think did it, they're not going to be happy because that's their loved one.
Right.
And I would feel the exact
Right.
same way.
Right.
But I think that's the tough role of the jobs that, you know, I have
Yeah.
in
Right.
your
And we
respective
have. Right.
situations that you
Right.
have. And I think we got to be fair and honest.
Right.
And so,
And I think that when you realize that unfortunately you are going to disappoint people
Yeah.
and you are going to make people unhappy, sometimes that is the moment at which you realize that you can do your job to the best of your ability, but you're not going to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
And it's both the plus of your job, because it gives you the freedom then to really do your job properly so that it's fair, and that you're not misserving people. If you're trying to make everyone happy, ultimately,
It's true.
that it's just never going to happen.
if you're, and I'll say this in your role as well as mine, if you are doing your job, you're going to lose a few friends,
Yes.
unfortunately. And
Yes.
Yes.
if you're doing your job, if you're not,
Yes.
if you don't lose any friends or you don't make anybody upset, you're not doing your
You're
job.
not doing your job.
And it's
And that-
unfortunate.
Right. Right.
But again, to me, what's more important is being able to look myself in the mirror
You bet.
and know that I did right. And here's the thing. And by being transparent and accountable, if I'm wrong, then show me, because
Right.
I'll correct it. I'm not one of those who are just going to
I'm not going to, right. I'm not
die
gonna
on the
say-
hill,
Right.
twist myself in a pretzel to just be right. No, if I'm wrong, then let's talk about it.
Right.
And we make a point to do that. And
That's great.
we got a really great staff, a very diverse staff, and not just racially diverse, which I think is important, bringing different perspectives because you make better decisions, but also diversity of experience. I made a point to bring in former defense attorneys. In addition to career prosecutors, we've hired our first social worker because we know we need to connect victims with resources. We've expanded as a result of this particular case. One thing that we learned is that many of our victims, particularly in cases involving officer-involved shootings or cases where we can't prosecute, they don't always get the resources they need to deal with the trauma. So we've expanded those services so that even if we can't prosecute a case and a family's dealt with a loss, we're going to connect them to the resources that they need to get past that trauma. And I think that's important.
Do you find it more difficult to prosecute an officer as opposed to just your average Joe?
Oh, absolutely it is. And again, I want to be clear. My father is
Right.
retired sergeant. And so I have a lot of respect for that. I have a lot of respect for that job. I think it's the toughest job in the world. And that's not it's flattery. I really think it is the challenges that one has to deal with. But also I think that just like any of us, I think everyone needs to be held accountable for their actions, and whatever the job is, you should be held accountable. And so, but as to answer your question directly, Mayor Pro Tem Clark, the laws are made that make it, the laws are such that it is tougher to prosecute in those cases. And in some ways it's fair, in some ways it's not fair. And I'll give you a couple examples. When you talk about use of force and recognizing the fear levels of individuals, what may scare you may not scare the mayor. And so when you're in a situation, it's hard to make a rule saying, well, this is the red line rule when you can use force. Well, what if you perceive the facts differently? That makes it a little bit tougher. On the other hand, we have laws such as the chase law that if a serious crime is committed, even if the officer, the community, that individual is no longer a threat, an officer can continue to chase that person to kingdom come, as opposed to waiting for backup, which would be more safer, not only for that individual, for the community, but also for the officer. And so I think there are some common sense, fair changes that we can make to the law that still recognize the need for officer safety. We know that that's important. That's a tough job that I'm not willing to do. but also make certain that we can hold officers accountable. You know, the bad officers. We know that there are bad officers, and we need laws in place to where we can get them out, because they put a black eye on the entire job. You know, when one officer abuses someone at a traffic stop or uses unlawful force at a traffic stop, they don't say that was Officer Smith. They say it was police, and that one officer or those officers who do those things, we need to be able to have protocols in place to get them out of there and get good people in.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, and I ask that only because, so many people believe that if an officer does something wrong, more than likely they're going to get away with it, with murder, especially with killing of black men. They're going to get away with it. And I think that's one of the more frustrating things as a black man, and you're a black man as well, that when you see these murders that happen on TV, and a guy's killed, he doesn't have a gun, or a man is killed and he had a right to carry that gun, shot 7 times, and he didn't show a threat, or whatever the case may be. The first thing our people is going to say, well, he's going to get away with it. He'll never get prosecuted for it. And that's what happens. And it gets old.
Yeah.
It gets old. And the burden is placed on your shoulders, and I wouldn't want your job for nothing. But it's hard to swallow that pill every time you see it happen. And I'm not saying that every shooting that happens isn't justified.
Right.
And I'm not also discounting what our police officers do for us. I support the police. It's just, unfortunately, you have just a handful out there that can really mess it up for all of them.
And a culture that needs to be addressed as well. We look in certain communities and we see this code of silence where no one wants to cooperate with law enforcement on cases. And we say, well, that only protects one class of people, criminals. You gotta,
it happens in our community too. We do the same thing.
Yeah, if you want to address, right, and that's the thing. But in law enforcement, we also see that same culture of no snitching on other officers. And if it's wrong in this community, in our community, it's also wrong there. And I'd say even more so in law enforcement, because we have higher expectations for law enforcement. So in addition to, I think by and large, the people getting into law enforcement are good people.
Yes,
but but in addition to those few that we're talking about, there's also a culture that needs to be addressed. And one thing that I'll say is with our office is that we're not going to shy away from prosecuting anyone if we believe that the law was violated. And so since I've been in office, we've prosecuted 3 police shootings, and that's 3 more than has happened in the 28 years prior to us, because there hadn't been any prior to us. But I'll say this, but when we find that shooting was legal and justified, then we're also going to stand behind that officer 110%. And so we're going to help, and I think the departments know that. We're going to hold them accountable, but if they're right, then we're going to support them. And I think that's how mayors want it, how council people want it, that's how plumbers want it.
Yes.
We just want to be, we want to be treated fairly, and that's what we're endeavoring to do. But to the original question, even when you have the facts and cases involving officers, it's still difficult. It's you can have the video and it's still a 50-50 shot with those types of cases. And it has a lot to do with our juries and just there's a lot of things. We could have a completely other coffee with mayors on that particular subject. Right.
I'm going to ask anyone in the listening audience if they would like to ask a question. I'm going to try to read this. For most of you don't know that I can't probably see beyond, but I'll.
Maybe she can read it.
Barb, would you mind reading it for me? I'm sorry. I fumble around.
Mr. Bell, what's your position on high cash bonds issued in St. Louis County and their effect on African Americans who can't afford to pay them? What are you doing to resolve this?
So I am a uh, huge advocate of changing and ending the cash bail system. And so I appreciate that question. On day one, that was one of our policies that we implemented internally, was to change the cash bail system, because what we find is that the murderer with means is able to purchase their freedom, while the low level offender who maybe picked up on drug possession, and we often know a drug problem also correlates with money problems. And so now that individual, who is not a threat to anyone, just needs help, has to stay in jail until and if they can make that bond. And think about the collateral consequences that come with that. You lose your job. Most of us, if you just don't show up for 2, 3, 4 weeks or more, your job's not just going to wait for you. So you lose your job, which correlates with higher crime rates. You can lose your house, because if you're a renter and you just don't pay rent for a few months, your landlord or your mortgage company is not just going to say, "Oh, no problem, we'll wait for you." No, you lose your housing. Think about that single mother, that single parent who doesn't have the support that some of us have. And, I have a mom that I can send my child to,
Right.
but some don't have that support. You could lose your children. All of these things correlate with recidivism, but also, to what end? We have individuals who just need treatment. Why are they seeing the inside of a jail? And that's costing taxpayer dollars in addition to making us less safe. And so I'm really excited about what we're seeing around the region, a push to end and transform this cash bail system. Because if someone is charged with a violent felony and they're a threat to the community, then they should have to stay and wait to trial and let that jury decide. But if they're getting probation anyway, or they just need treatment, why are we putting them in jail? And so I appreciate that question so much.
Okay. Barb?
As an Olivet resident, I'm excited to see Wesley Bell in the neighborhood. Welcome, sir. You inspire confidence in us, and especially in our young Black men who have been on the receiving end of injustice. As a father to a 25-year-old Black graduate student, my worry each day is that whenever he goes to work, he might encounter a racist cop who assumes being Black is a crime. Why should be normalize the profiling that you and Mayor Pro Tem experienced? Why should we normalize the profiling that you and Mayor Pro Tem experienced? What can you or we do to change the situation where Blacks are followed along Ladue Road or elsewhere in Olivet for being Black?
So many layers to that question. I mean, an excellent question.
Need another coffee with the mayor.
Absolutely. And I don't want to normalize those types of actions. I think we were addressing it from the standpoint that it's our reality. And because I have a now 24-year-old son, I want to make sure that he's safe first and foremost.
Right.
I would love to make a point and make a point to show that this is wrong, but what's more important to me is his safety first. And so we have to have those conversations. But yes, we should endeavor to live in a society where we don't have to have that, to have those talks, if you will. And yeah, I just it's tough. It really is. And all of our policies, I can say, at the heart of them are to try to address not only systemic racism and sexism, but also equity and fairness. When we look at diversion programs, that's because what we're saying is that we don't think that individuals, and we've helped a lot of Black folks, white folks, and others, keep them out of jail cells, because we know that this individual who just has a drug problem doesn't need to see a jail cell, and a jail cell is not going to help them. And so, and also it goes at addressing over-aggressive policing that we see in many of our less affluent communities, which lead to charges, arrests, and once even with an arrest, that makes it a little bit more difficult to get a job. And so by not prosecuting small amounts of marijuana, well, we're de-incentivizing police from pulling people over for small amounts of marijuana, by sending people with small amounts of drugs into diversion and getting treatment, but we're de-incentivizing the over-aggressive police stops with respect to those things. Now, we can't change their behavior. They don't work for me, but we can influence the behavior by when a case comes to us for marijuana possession. Why are you even bringing this to us? We're not prosecuting it. If the person needs help, we're going to get them help.
Now, police officers do a fair amount of diversity training. Have you sat through any of their diversity training that they do? And if so, what do you think about it? And if not, is that something that you think might be important for you to do? Pick one of the departments. And I don't know for certain if all diversity training is similar throughout the region, or is it individualized?
So essentially, of the hours, the post hours that officers have to do, I think an hour or two is related to sensitivity training, cultural sensitivity, but it's generally done online, and there's no way to really monitor what the individual is getting out of it. And I think that's the problem. We got to do better, essentially,
Okay.
is what I'm saying. And so I think that that's something that we need to expand, because when we look at and I've used this analogy before, if you go back to someone that was 25 in the mid 60s, that individual is only about 75-ish or around that time now. So even if you're of the argument that we don't have issues in policing, then let's go back to a time where we know we can agree. Let's just say that. Now, we know that there are issues now, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, go back to that. So the 65, that 25-year-old, we know that individual saw racism and things of that nature, no question, and much more overtly as well. Now, that person's kids are in their 50s, probably 40s. And then that person's grandkids are in their 30s, 20s, and so on. So when you look at people and you say, well, why are you looking at law enforcement in a negative way? Even if you think things are better now, well, that person's heard the stories. They've talked to their grandfather, they've talked to their father, their mother, who are still alive and have reason to distrust law enforcement. And so we have to recognize, and law enforcement has to do a better job of recognizing that when someone has hostile feelings towards you, and we're not talking about where you don't feel safe, but when someone has hostile feelings for you, I think that sensitivity training is important to recognize. It's not just about you. It's about the experiences. And again, I went back to the 60s, but we got experiences even my age and young and those younger. I think it's important that officers recognize that it's not just about you as an individual. It's about the experiences that people have had, not only throughout their life, but through generations. And I'll use Captain Farmer for an example. He'll tell the story about going into a restaurant and when he first started as an officer, and someone saying, man, a derogatory term, the police. And, when he first got in there, like, what did I do to them? Like, why? He didn't even know me. And he realized it's not about him. It's about how some people perceive the badge. And if you're going to get into that field, that's a part of it. Just like we know. There's some positives to our job and there's some negatives.
Right.
But we chose this life.
Yes.
And if you're going to be an officer, you're choosing that life. And there's a lot you can do to help it. And that's why I'm proud of a lot of the officers that I know, Captain Farmer, Chief Swope, and Raj Johnson, who's with us as well. They get involved in the community. They talk to people. They get out. Because one thing I found is that it's hard to hate people that you know.
Yes.
And so you have that person who just doesn't like you. When you sit down and talk to them, they may still not like you, but it's not as intense.
Well, that's how we do it here in Olivet.
Exactly.
Our officers get out
I know.
and they talk
I know.
And they
to
do.
people,
I know.
and people like
We do
our
have
officers.
coffee with a cop
Yeah.
once a month. It might interest you to know that we also did a listening session. Myself, Councilmember Clark, Chairman Tom Clark, and Police Chief Dave Wolf, who's standing in the back of the room. We invited members of the African American community to come and sit with us. some of them in the room were
It was a love session.
80. Some of them were a lot younger.
Mhm.
Lou Brock Jr. brought his daughter and a friend of hers. And it was very enlightening in the sense that it made us feel good about our what we're doing as department. But it was interesting from the generational perspectives and how exactly what you just said, that younger group was far more outspoken and far more wary of police than the older generation was. It was interesting in that regard. And so we're going to do another listening session, and we're going to do it where, and the chief is putting it together, where we're doing just younger people. Because we really want to hear that tone and that conversation and see what we can do to help change that feeling that they have. It was very interesting. At the end of the listening session, we were standing in the back of this room with Lou Brock and his daughter and her friend, and the chief said to them, we were talking food, and they were saying how they like to go to Freddy's and it's really delicious. And the chief
That's
said,
something we can all relate to.
and Chief said, I like Freddy's too. And so he said, well, why don't we all get together and go to Freddy's? And they were like, we can do that with you? And he said, well, of course we can do that. And that was an aha moment for them. And it was an aha moment for the chief as well, in that we have to get that message out, that
Absolutely.
we can do those things. We can all sit down together and we can discuss our differences, and we can discuss our concerns, and we can work together to figure it all out.
And then there's two things that I'll add to add on to what you said that we've done. And one is working with some others, Captain Farmer and Charlene Hughes and several others. We created a group called Humanity in the Middle. And what we do is this started off as a bridge to try and bridge law enforcement with young people and to help bridge that gap. And so we set up an all expenses trip, I should say. Organizations from all around the region, Better Family Life and Beyond Housing, and several other groups contributed. And we took these kids on a trip. We've done it now for 4 years. And the first year we took them to DC. So we did a sites tour, the African American Museum, and we went to Congress and things of that nature, but also on a college tour of the colleges up there. And the second year, I think we did South Carolina. We went to Atlanta because my father down there, they hosted us and fed everybody. And so, and many of the chaperones were law enforcement. So myself, I was one. We had a few other community members, but several police officers. And what I noticed is the conversations that some of these young people were having with officers that had nothing to do with law. They're talking about Cardinals, they're talking about football, they're talking to each other like people.
Right.
And what I'm proud about, one is that every kid who's been on that trip with us now for 4 years, we take 15 to 20 juniors and seniors every year. Every single one of them has gone on to college, or trade school, or the military. Every single one of them. And they all know an officer now that they look at as my friend. That's not an officer, that's farmer. That's such and such. And I think that's a big thing. And then second thing that we do real quick is that we have a partnership with one of the local municipalities. They allow us to use their police simulator. You may have done it before. And so we host groups free of charge. They get to come in, do the simulator, and we have officers that will facilitate, and they get a chance just to have conversations in a non-confrontational way, in a fun way, because the simulator is fun as well. And they get to talk, and we open it to any question. So you can come in there. We've hosted junior high students up to seniors, to sororities, and everybody in between. We host them free of charge. because it's an opportunity to have conversations. And I'll say one quick thing. Pro-police, people who don't like police, we bring them all in. And we had one young lady, she had her Black Lives Matter shirt on. She sat down with that group and she said, I do not like police officers. And so Captain Farmer, I'm proud of him. He was like, hey, that's okay. We're going to do this. We're going to still have fun. At the end of it, they went through it. And that's not a good sign. But we went through it. And at the end of it, she came, and we got this part on video. She came and she said, you know what? I still don't like police officers, but I respect what you do a whole lot more than I did when I walked in, and hugged us. And so, again, we know that there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. That's not going to change in one session or 1 year, but we got to start having those conversations. And that's not just good for the public and those people who participated. That's good for the officers too, because they're having those interactions and they're becoming more connected to their community. And when you're a part of a community, you navigate a little bit differently. When you don't want to let people down because these are your people. This is your community.
Right.
I would say in our community, we do a fairly good job, I would say a pretty good job of community policing and having the police interact and know their residents. We had an opportunity when we were building this building to actually walk the city. And I need to ask you about your time.
And I'm going to I'm okay on time, but Captain Farmer, we got a call on our outside phone. So could you call it back and see what's going on? And I'm sorry to do this now, but it's kind of important.
That's okay.
So he'll
this
call
is what
it,
the job is all
and
about.
if you got to
This
grab
is,
me, I'll grab me.
Okay, this
Okay.
is what it's about. This is
Yeah.
real. This is very real.
Yeah.
And it happens all like that.
It really does.
Yes.
It really does.
But and when we were walking, so when we were building this building, we wanted to educate our population. And so we spent time walking the entire street, the entire city, talking to residents. And our police
Way to do it.
participated with us, our fire department participated with us. But what was interesting, as I walked, sometimes we did it, probably took us 3 weekends to walk the whole city. And sometimes I'd be paired with a police officer and we would walk and he would say, well, you know, so-and-so lives over there. And you know, so-and-so lives over there. And you know, so-and-so lives there. And that one lives there. They know everybody and they know where people live and they know what people drive.
Right.
And it's really, really interesting to me to live in a community like that and to have that interaction. And I wish everyone could have that.
And I'm going to tell you another reason that that's so important is that what we have seen in communities where departments don't do those things, when you have, for example, a shooting, in those communities that don't practice that community and neighborhood policing, you don't have anyone in the community stepping up saying, hey, I know this person. I know this officer. Let's at least find, let's see what the facts say because I trust this person. That's what we saw in Ferguson prior to changes that were made. But when you do those things and something happens, there is no bigger credibility or more credibility than you can get when there's people in the community saying, hey, hold on.
Right.
I know this officer.
Right.
I know her. I know him.
Right.
Let's at least find out what happened.
Right.
And that's the difference that we saw in other places where people didn't know the officer, and so there was no one speaking up on that officer's behalf. But when you do those things and you put the work in ahead of time, it definitely helps. And what I found is that there is no more important relationship than the relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Absolutely.
And you all know this. And when I was on the council, people would come in just raging about potholes and trash. I mean, they're ready to vote you out. But as soon as that trash is picked and that pothole is fixed, they're baking you cookies.
Yeah.
But when people have a bad interaction with law enforcement, it doesn't go away.
No.
It doesn't go away so easily. And that's why, that's just one of the reasons that's a tough job. But, with as they say, borrow a phrase, with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
That it
And
does.
so, yeah.
Tell me about your time frame because I want to be able to get a couple more questions, but I need to be respectful of your time.
Are we okay, or do we need to?
Okay. So Barb, okay. So this is what's happening in real time right now. Mr. Bell's going to probably have to leave us in a few minutes, so we're going to take a couple more questions, and then he's going to go do what he does. So Barb, I'll let
Okay.
you.
I'm going
Make
to
a
take
choice.
one that looks at the future. What are the 3 objectives you have for the future in your position?
That's a teacher right there.
That's definitely, I would imagine, a teacher, and as a former teacher, professor, I appreciate those questions. One, we want to continue to offer treatment programs and expand those programs so that we can help those low-level nonviolent offenders holistically. We still got more work to do. And honestly, our goal is to prove that this type of situation with respect to drug use, drug abuse, shouldn't even be in the criminal justice arena. It should be in the public health arena because it is a public health crisis. And what we're hoping to continue to show the data that proves that when individuals get the support they need, when they have the tools in the tool belt, that they are much more likely to succeed and not re-offend. And at that point, maybe they will take that out of our budget, which I'm fine with, and putting it into the public health budget where it belongs. Secondly, I would say that it's important it's important for us to, we got to modernize our office. We're still with paper files. The courts are electronic, and so this was something that I was asking for in the budget. And don't get me wrong, the county council people, your counterparts there, they got a lot to deal with. So I understand that, but the problem is it slows the system down.
Sure.
So with COVID, it's out of tragedy sometimes comes opportunity, and with CARES funds, CARES funding, we were able to move our office in the direction of modernizing. You know, with the courts essentially closed and witnesses and victims who have a right to be in court cannot go physically in the court.
Right.
We have to set up witness rooms, and so we need screens and that kind of access. So CARES funding has allowed us to purchase about 17 monitors that we can put throughout the office that not only helps us, our attorneys who also have to have remote access and conduct court remotely and through their offices as opposed to in court. And so they have to do those things. Witnesses have to do those things. And also we got a space. We can't have 120 people in one space.
Right.
And so by having those monitors and that wiring that the CARES Funding Act allowed us to do, to rewire many of the places in our office that didn't have it, that's been just huge to be able to bring this office into the 21st century. And I'll say this, there are many people, and we won't talk about the guilty people, obviously people don't care as much about, but there are people who were charged with crimes that weren't found guilty, but they had to sit in jail longer because the process was slower, and a lot to do with how our office functioned.
Okay.
And so it's important for us to modernize.
Yes.
And again, the CARES Funding Act helped with that. And then last, this community engagement piece. This is important to us. I created the unit, the community engagement unit, and I looked at a handful of the officers that I had saw in my previous life, if you will. The handful of officers that I saw that were constantly in the community, and Captain Farmer was one of the primary ones. And so I recruited him to bring that same approach to our office. We want to be in the community. We want people to know where we are and be able to ask us questions. You can follow either one of us on social media. We're really proactive about putting that out, because I think it's important for people to be able to see what we're doing.
Yep.
And so we put that out on Facebook. You can follow Captain Clay Farmer. You can follow myself, Wesley Bell, St. Louis County Prosecutor, Facebook, Instagram, on all of them. And so it's just important for us. I don't want anyone to say, well, we only see you come election time. No, you're not gonna be able to say that.
Right.
We make a point to get out there, and because I think, and as you all know, when you're trying to think of platforms to run on, all you got to do is go out in the community. When you start talking to people, you're going to find your platform because they're going to tell you
What it is.
what's important
Exactly.
in the community.
I would agree with
and that's
that.
exactly what happened to me, and that's why we've continued to be out there.
I'm going to ask you, I'd like to ask you one or two last questions.
I think
We're okay?
Yep.
Okay. When are you up for reelection?
I'm up for re-election in 2022.
Okay, so you have time to still accomplish all the rest of the things that you want to accomplish before
Absolutely.
you have to get back out onto the campaign trail. So my next question though is, while the individual asked you what you see for the future, I'd like to know what you see for your personal future in terms of where do you want to land? Because
I get that
you're
question.
extremely, you have a lot of great ideas, and while they'll serve the county well, do you think they might serve a broader, bigger platform even better?
I'll be as honest as I possibly can. When I was at the city council in Ferguson, that was not by any means a stepping stone position. I was elected in 2015, 9 months after Ferguson became Ferguson, and I knew full well that this would probably be my first and last position because I came into the heart of protest and unrest, and I ran to try and push for change. But you know how it is. Once you get elected, 2 weeks later, you're viewed as the establishment. And that was an adjustment for me.
True.
Like, hold on, I was just a citizen pushing for these changes 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And so what I always looked at is, and I've said this before to you all, is I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know that I did the right thing. And my thoughts were, I'm going to let the performance dictate what happens next. And if I stay a council person, so be it. I'm okay with that. As it worked out, I had a lot of eye-opening experiences helping, not only working on the Ferguson consent decree, but helping write the consent decree and working with the Department of Justice attorneys, some of the best attorneys from across the country. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that we could be doing better. In Ferguson, just the experience of going through and dealing with, and not only watching activists, but watching activists also become a part of city government, which I think was a great thing to see. And it taught me a lot of things to see people evolve into these ways. And so as a result, it was kind of a culmination of things that made me say, you know what, some of these things I'm learning that we can do better. These are things that need to be happening in St. Louis County. And so that's when the idea came that, I think we can do a lot better. And so I ran, and so same philosophy. This job is tough enough where I don't have the luxury of thinking ahead. And so I want to do a good job for the people in this community, the people that I grew up with. And we'll see. And at some point in the future, if another opportunity is there, fine. If not, I'm happy to go teach again. I love working with young people. But to answer the question directly, I am really focused on doing a good job here, and if and that's kind of where I am at this point.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have any last question?
No, I appreciate that you dared to try. Most people would have never gone up against him, speaking of your predecessor, but to dare to try. And you did, and you came through. And I think it was a welcome relief, especially for the people in the Black community, to have you to succeed. And you did it with faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, and you moved the mountain. And I'm thankful for you to be in your position. I'm very thankful that you came here to the city of Olivet and talked with us. It's been a true honor.
This is the fun part of the job. You talked about some of the things that are not as fun, but this is part of it. One of my first jobs was right down the street at 966, that building. I worked for GC Services in college at the time. I think MCI or something like that. And so it's always, I grew up in North County, so this is home to me. I went to Hayeswood East.
I lived in Countryside Apartments.
I lived in Countryside Apartments in
I was on
junior
El
high.
Sabato.
I was on El Tigre.
Okay, so
First street, you come in right to the right.
I was the second to the right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, so this is home for me. And so coming in and being able to talk, especially in these intimate settings where you can actually go in depth into issues
Right.
is, I think is invaluable, and not only to me, but also hopefully for
Yeah, I
the
hope.
residents. And I'm happy to come back.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
I might very well take you up on that.
Take me up on it.
And I hope everyone who listened today certainly learned an awful lot, not only about you, but mostly about the changes that you've brought to the county, which are incredibly commendable. And I think they are not just changes, they're life changes for people. And that's great. That's great. And you know, when someone sets about to do something, say that they're going to do it, and then they do it, that's important. And I don't, it's interesting, I don't view your changes as necessarily activism. I view them as common sense.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think
I could
that
not
you
agree.
have brought about a lot of, even for me, a lot of things for me to think about in terms of how changes can be made, whether they're local changes or how we can all work together. And I know that we all have our little municipalities, but I think there are regional conversations that we all can continue to have so that we can all continue to work and make this region a better region for everyone, for everybody that lives here. And that will put St. Louis on the map.
And I couldn't agree more. And people, when I was running for office, people would say, well, you should stay in North County and Mid County. Don't worry about West County and South County. But no, we weren't going to concede any area, any regions, because, if I'm going to be the St. Louis County prosecutor, it has to be for all of St. Louis County. And so we made a point.
That's part of the county.
Exactly. So we made a point to go out, and we still make a point to go to those areas, because those constituents have the same wants and needs and aspirations as all of us, just like in North County and Mid County. And so, it's important to show up for these types of things and make sure that we are all working together and that this dialogue is open, because we created a task force, a carjacking and auto theft task force, because we also have a Chiefs Advisory Council. So we meet with them every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So when we have policies, we can get their input, but also they can tell us what they're seeing from their perspective. And that's one thing that was coming back, is that we were seeing an increase in those kind of crimes. And so we created that specialized unit regionally, working with federal investigators, as well as local St. Louis County and a few municipalities, which will be adding municipalities who want to get involved. But that's because we have that regional approach. And I think you hit the nail on the head, that we have to continue to look at it in that way, because crime doesn't keep borders, and many of our issues that we're dealing with don't have borders.
Exactly.
And so Mayor Springer and Mayor Pro Tem Clark, I appreciate this invite. I know your city manager as well over there on the ones and twos.
That's what runs everything right there.
Right.
Well, I want to
appreciate
thank
the
you again
opportunity.
for coming. I should open this, but I'll leave it closed. So every year the city of Olivet does Turkey Trot.
Okay.
It started out as a 5K run, walk. It happens on Thanksgiving morning, and we raised money for the Harvey Kornblum Food Pantry.
Okay.
Right now, the food pantry serves about 6,500 people every month. And,
That's awesome.
and in this time, they're probably serving even more than that. And this year, we're going to do a virtual run, because it's going to be run, walk, or bike, because we can't all be together
Exactly.
on Thanksgiving morning. Anyway, this is for you. It is a gator, so you can actually put it up if you want it as a mask.
Okay.
Excuse me, and or as a gator, or as a hat, or any number of other
see
things.
all the different pictures. Okay.
Yeah, so
I can't
so that
see.
is
Awesome.
to say thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
To sit with us this morning.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. next month. I have not yet announced a guest, but stay tuned, and we will all convene back again on Zoom. And I hope you all have a great week ahead and enjoy the rest of the month and the weekend coming up. There's a lot going on in the city of Olivet. You can log on to the website to find out what else we have going on, and we will all come back again. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good day.